Thank you for having me here at Design Indaba. It's really quite an honor. A lot of my work, as you'll see, deals with social justice, and I can't think of a country that exemplifies this idea as much as South Africa, so it really means a lot for me to be here. This is a photograph of the house where I grew up in, a beautiful shithole, as is, is the language of the day. It's really a really small town in Cuba. And in this little town is basically where I learned everything that I practice today, everything that I do. It's all about being good to your neighbors, taking care of people, being together and creating something together. And it's really in this house on this street where I learned everything. This is a picture of me when I was about 4 or 5 years old. My father was a photographer. And as you can see, he always liked to take risks, so he put me on a rooftop on a ladder and took a picture of me. This is the porch of my house. There's my dad's sign, fotógrafo, means photographer, and I'm right there dancing. So I love to dance, and we all would just be out on that porch dancing all the time. And this is a photograph from my family's farm. So we did a lot of outdoor things all the time in Cuba. Another thing that was very important when I was a child is that I grew up in a very mixed neighborhood. All my neighbors were black kids, mixed race kids. I was, the one white kid on the block. And it was from this growing up, and the times that I got sick, the people that cured me were the black people on the street that knew the right to get things to give me, the right teas and things like that. So I had a big love for black people from the time that I was a very young kid. This is another photograph from the street. An early influence in my work were Cuban film posters. So whenever we went to the movies in Cuba, there were no foreign posters that were in the country because foreign posters were not allowed, so many of the posters at movie theaters were just made locally by Cuban designers. A lot of the simple graphics and simple colors of Cuban posters come from the fact that we had no other colors. So you might go to print your posters at a factory and you had 2 or 3 colors, and that's all you did. Within a 6-month period, maybe every poster that came out of that factory was using the same colors. So Cubans became very adept at trying to figure out what to do with very little. Another influence in my work early on were political graphics and billboards that were found throughout the countryside. And these are some of them. And slogans such as, it wasn't just socialism, it was socialism or death. Fatherland or death. So if you're a 6, 7, 8-year-old, you were fascinated by death all the time. And also the military parades. This is a drawing that I'm working on a memoir. This is one drawing that I did of memories of military parades. And as a child, these kind of things had a big influence on me. And I like to play dress up. So instead, in the United States, you might dress up as Mickey Mouse or Beauty and the Beast or whatever. When I was a kid, I liked to dress up in my uncle's military uniform. And then on the other side over here, you can see me, that's my school uniform, where they would dress us up like Che Guevara. We had a little beret, and that's how we went to school. But in the middle of all this, my father was a very counter-revolutionary. He just didn't like power. He didn't like people telling him what to do. So he went out and found foreign magazines and wallpapered the entire back of the house in advertising. So as you can see, there's ads for Mercedes, Volkswagen, beer, and I remember as a little child looking up at this stuff, being very fascinated by these graphics and things that we never had in our home or we could never even afford. They were foreign, but I would just look at these graphics and was fascinated by them. And one of the things my father would do is he would bring people into our house to have their photographs taken in front of this wall of commercial goods. And it was quite, it got everybody in the house to take pictures of themselves in this format. Photograph of my family at the farm. I think about a year after this photograph was taken, most of us had left the country. This was in 1980. The reason was that any opposition to the government in Cuba was promptly tamped down. People were beaten. Groups of people were sent to people's houses to shame them, to beat them up. And eventually, Castro said, anybody that wants to leave the country, you can leave. We don't want you here. You're scum, you're worms. And so my father decided to leave the country along with my mother and about 20 other family members. We were interned in a camp for about a week. The camp was called the Mosquito, so that's never a good sign when you end up at the Mosquito for a week. And there were many things that happened to us in this camp. We were beaten up by the military, threatened, things like that. Eventually, we were able to board a boat and head to Florida. So this is me right here in the red coat on the boat. This is my father, my sister, and these guys I don't know. But if you saw Scarface, that would be Tony Montana. So basically what Castro did is he emptied out all his prisons, insane asylums, prostitutes, all sorts of people were loaded onto the boats along with the family, and we all ended up in Miami. The families were taken to houses. We were welcomed by the U.S. Coast Guard when we arrived. This is a photograph of my sister and other family members. And this is when we arrived. This is the entire family when we finally arrived. The two boat captains were a couple of guys from Jamaica who rented the boat to my family, and we were able to escape the island. One day, we left at 10 p.m. one night from Cuba and all of that you know, and arrived in the United States overnight, and immediately I landed in Miami, so I went from this kind of graphics to this kind of graphics. So it was that jolt of socialist graphics, American advertising, and all of these things that blended together in my young mind when I was about 9 years old. I became fascinated by rock and roll, and we started having parties for the family. So we switched the salsa parties to rock and roll parties, and we would create these drum sets. Every time we'd have a theme, it was a new band, Kiss, Jay Giles Band, Scorpions. I don't know what we did, but it was fun. Eventually, I ended up in college in New York City, and this is from my first year at Pratt Institute. And I became involved in the school newspaper, creating graphics, stories, photo essays for the school newspaper. And this is one of the early newspapers that we did on student activism. I then went back to Cuba in the 90s. About 14 years after I left, I was able to travel back to Cuba for the first time again, and I did a lot of drawings. This one, for example, says a free country, but you can't really get anywhere because your car doesn't work. So I would make these kind of like drawings that had commentary, but I couldn't say too much because I was still trying to get back into Cuba, and then I didn't want to get in too much trouble down there. This one says, victory is within us, but, you know, they don't look that happy. And then now, flash forward to a few years ago now. This is my studio. I have a studio near New York City. I do sculpture, installations, graphics, posters, paintings, a lot of different facets of my career and the kind of work that I do. I've done about 60 or 70 different posters for Broadway shows, operas, theaters, and this is a collection of them from a show that I had in the Bronx. These are a few of my opera posters. Well, usually what I try to do with my images is try to create something that's very strong, graphic, gets your attention, whether it's a large poster or a small postage stamp. I really want you to notice what I'm trying to say. I want you to get something out of it as quickly as possible. I'm always trying to make images that can be understood by someone with a PhD degree or someone like my grandfather who doesn't speak English and was a farm worker his whole life. So I'm trying to make images that everyone can relate to, show and share in a similar way. These are some other opera posters that I've created. This is on Broadway, Rogers Theater in New York City. And this was a poster that I did for my first show back in Havana. And to get a sense of a little bit of the troublemaker that I am sometimes, I was asked to have a show there, and they asked me to give it a title. I said, okay, yeah, sure, I have a title, Nature Boy. And they liked it. They assumed that it was just about nature, this and that. I designed the poster. I had them printed at the government factories in Havana. And when I arrived there, the curator at the museum said, hey, I just found out that Nature Boy is the name of the boat you left the country on. And I said, yeah, that's right. And she's like, well, it's too late to change the posters now. I said, yeah, I know. That was the plan. So then she just said, okay, well, we'll just run through this. And she tried to make the most of it. But by that time, I wanted to have a show there, but I wanted to have it my way. I wasn't just going to go there and just put on a happy face, basically. And then the thing that I've gotten mostly known for is magazine covers. So I've done about 100, 150 magazine covers. Usually these are some early ones from the 90s. This is Time Magazine from 94. And what I try to do is the same thing, tell a story as quickly and concisely as possible. The cover here for Newsweek was done after the killing of bin Laden, and I had 1 day to finish that cover. So I usually have a day, 2, 3 days to finish my work. The first time that I noticed that the power of magazines and magazine covers was this communication arts cover that I did in 2006. It was a special story about Cuban design, and I created this idea of sort of how Cuba was changing. Cuba was becoming more commercial, and at the same time, Americans were trying to create this rebel aesthetic. So I did this cover, and it created a lot of controversy online. It ended up in Cuba. People were putting it in bags, and if they showed it to someone, they had to like kind of sneakily show it because it was illegal in Cuba. So that's when I first realized the power that magazine covers and images can really have. Another cover that I did that was very controversial was this one on Silicon Valley and women and on sexual harassment. So I did this cover, and it split women into half and half. Half hated it, thought that I was re-victimizing women. The other half were supportive, saying women can wear whatever they want. What's the problem here? And it created a really big conversation on the internet, on the Today Show. She took the cover and threw it in the trash can live on TV. And it went on for about a week or two of viral media coverage on this cover. And the funny thing is, I had about 15 other ideas for this cover, which no one ever saw. But you guys see it now. And then in about 2014, I was watching what was happening in the Middle East and Syria, where ISIS was taking over more territory and going into towns, killing people, beheading people. And I thought, well, no one's really talking about this. I have to do something. I have to make people aware of what's happening in the Middle East. Just little old me. So I started creating these images to get awareness for the topic, putting them on the internet, and they started becoming viral. This is one. I started, seeing these people taking selfies of themselves with beheadings behind them. This is another one, sort of imagining what an ISIS playground would look like. And they were pretty harsh, They were meant to get the attention of Americans and the attention of New Yorkers, of American politicians. So if you see this poster, you might, it makes you think twice when you look at it. This was during the bucket challenge. There was the water bucket challenge, and I found the whole exercise to be pretty preposterous, that people were wasting so much water and so much of their life, dunking buckets of water on themselves. Meanwhile, there's all this killing happening in the Middle East, so I just did this image, and it kind of stopped everyone in their tracks. I don't think any of my friends they all stopped posting water videos after this thing. And then what happened is I took my graphics, and they became so strong and confrontational that it became normal to publish this kind of work. So places like the New York Times or Time Magazine started hiring me to create some of the work that I was already doing. So this is a page for the New York Times. Here's where I started creating more of a street campaign of posters with the images that I was making. And this is a street poster in Chelsea, in Manhattan. Here it is in Times Square. And as I was putting up the posters and seeing cops walking by, I started realizing, wow, they might actually think that I support terrorism here. So when you take the graphics from your studio, you put it out in the street, and you start relating with people and police and all sorts of, it gets a little bit more complicated, but I don't know. I guess I like some of the trouble that it can cause. This is a good example of what I was trying to get at. I put up this poster, and then this man stood in front of it for about 30 minutes and watched a movie. And I created some ideas for three-dimensional installation art based on this, where people might be at the park. What if you have sculptures of bombs just dropping around them? It's something that Americans never think about. The idea that bombs could land in New York City, whereas in the Middle East, people are just used to this is their life. So I thought, what if you bring this to New York? No one really supported this idea. But if there's anybody out there, and this is another idea for the new museum. I sent it to the new museum. They didn't support it either. And all this work culminated in this show that I had in the Bronx that brought all this work about terrorism into a single show. But then in 2015, about a year later, I started seeing what was happening in the United States and how the right-wing extremism and the ISIS terrorism, to me, was feeling just as dangerous. I was more threatened by the Ku Klux Klan than by ISIS, okay? I, in the United States, was being more threatened by right-wing white nationalists than by ISIS that were in the Middle East, so yet we were obsessed with ISIS. So I started figuring out a way to combine these two and bringing them to the same consciousness that, hey, these two people and these two groups are just as dangerous to us than the others. So I started creating posters for Trump showing how these two groups would benefit from the election of Trump. This is because I noticed that I started seeing things in Trump that were very similar to Castro and to some of the dictatorships and the quality of the dictatorships that I grew up in. So I felt that I needed to kind of warn the United States about what was about to happen. And during the election, right before every debate, I started posting images, thinking, sort of showing what I thought was going to happen at the debate. Here's during the pussy grabbing incident. Here's another one. And what I was trying to do is I have many people in the media that follow my work, and I was trying to get the media itself to change how they cover this candidate, because they were doing it as even sides. It was this candidate and that candidate, let's treat them evenly. And I felt like we were being too fair to someone that was quite a danger to the United States and the world. So then Time Magazine called after seeing all the images that I had done on the internet and asked me if I could create a cover of Donald Trump. It was in the middle of the summer of the election, and his campaign was really, it looked like it was over. So they wanted to create a portrait of Donald Trump, and they had a headline already called Meltdown. So I sent a few sketches, a few ideas, and this is the one that they picked. And I actually thought that it wouldn't get published because I know that Time Magazine can be pretty conservative about how they portray the president and things like that. So I sent it in, forgot about it, and then 2 days later it was published. And once it was published, it became a big sensation. It was all over the internet. Then about 2 months later, another thing happened during the campaign where the tape came out where he said he grabs women, just nasty things. So they thought that the campaign again was going to be over, and they wanted to create a second cover called Total Meltdown, kind of like a sequel to the first cover. and this is my initial sketch. These are two versions. I wanted to really be just grossly melted. And this took me, I had 2 hours to work on it. So I did this cover in 2 hours, and I sent them both of these ideas, and they got back to me, and they're like, well, we don't think it really quite looks like him. So they were handling it like a regular cover, like I had to do revises on a 2-hour deadline. And finally, this is the one that they published. This was the cover of the year for ASME, the year that it came out. And then it got all over the place. So it went all over the media, on NBC News. These people here put it in a restaurant outside. I got this picture from someone that painted her fingernails and mailed me the photograph. So since it was such a big deal, and we had about 3 weeks left to the election, 2 or 3 weeks, I wanted to create a poster campaign. I wanted to go out in the street, take photographs of people with these posters, just to try to get people to vote against him, basically, because I thought it was going to be such a problem for the country and for the world. So I created a set of stencil posters. I made about 50 of these, 50, 60, and I started taking them out into the streets of New York City. One of the first places that I went to was here, was the lobby of Trump International building. And I showed up there around 10 o'clock at night with a poster in my hand, sat down at the sofa, and just laid it down on the coffee table, and I left. I don't know what happened after that. And then all of these other places in New York City over here. I went to Times Square and started painting them live on the street and giving them out to people. So I got surrounded by dozens of people wanting these posters. I gave some to some of the Mexicans that lie under these costumes. They're all undocumented immigrants, probably. And they were like, yeah, sí, dale, tira una foto, por favor, yeah. Yeah, and then they're like, you want me to pay? And like, no, we'll do it for free. They were so pissed, so. And then right around the time of the election, Der Spiegel called, and they wanted to get that same power. The election was about to happen, and no one knew what was going to happen. So they wanted me to create a cover that would say that, and this is one for them. Then, right when the Muslim ban was announced, I was very angry about this because I saw people that were not allowed into the country, little kids that were banned from seeing their grandparents, and they were held at the airport. So I created this image. I basically just took, as you remember, this image that I had from my poster from about a year or a year and a half earlier, and stuck the Statue of Liberty on it and his head. I took this image, I posted it online, and it went viral on my own Twitter feeds, just thousands and thousands of retweets. I thought it would stay there. It would, that would be the end of it. But then Der Spiegel called me, and they wanted me to create a cover for them on the same topic. I created a few different ideas. Nothing was quite working, so they went into my Twitter feed, and they found that image and asked if they could publish it, which shocked me that they wanted to put this on the cover of their magazine. But I said, sure, let's go for it. And they were about to publish it, and I remember telling a few friends of mine, I think something's going to happen tomorrow. So this thing got just put on Der Spiegel's Twitter feed on a Friday night, and then that Saturday morning, before the cover was even out, the image was appearing at protests throughout the country. This was printed up and put at a protest in New York City. This is from Denver. Someone put this picture up. Another one, I don't remember where this one was from. I think this was another one from San Francisco, perhaps, an AP photo. This was at Mar-a-Lago in Florida. And then it became a big controversy. What had I done? What had this kid done? And part of the story became that I was an immigrant to the United States. So here is this single person, this immigrant, that is talking back and fighting back against the president about immigrant issues. So it became the subject of many roundtables, many Mickey Mouse protests. I took this down to Times Square, and I liked all these characters with it. And then suddenly I became the story. So I started appearing on television shows. Films started being made about me, people in my studio, film crews, all sorts of things, trying to get to the bottom of what made me do this kind of work. And basically what made me do it is that I felt what the country symbolized to the world was being threatened, or it was probably over. The idea that the United States is a beacon to the world had been destroyed by one single man. So I became so angry by this concept because I loved the United States so much, and I felt that I needed to start making more and more work to show that the United States was still a place where you could speak your mind. The United States is still a place where an immigrant can go and say and do whatever they want, because that's what my father told me that the United States was all about. So I started making more and more work against the president. This is my father right here. He lives in an area in Florida where he's surrounded by right-wing nuts, and he's like, no, give me the poster, I want to take a picture with it. So this other guy is in Mexico, from a lecture that I gave in Mexico, and then it became this idea that the poster wasn't just a poster, the poster stood for what you stood for, and if you had the guts to stand up against the president, you would grab this poster and you would take a picture with it, and it kept on happening. This is the Trump National Doral in Miami. The complicated thing that happened is then I started seeing Trump everywhere. So I was just walking on the sidewalk and I saw a poop, dogs don't poop sign, and I'm like, that's Trump right there. So I created this image. I started making more and more images, putting them on the internet. I like really dumb animations, and this is a really dumb one that I like, but I like it. It's just so simple. And I was at Whiten and Kennedy recently, I had a show, and I showed this slide, and I said, this is something I want to do. Can anybody help me? And afterwards, someone in the audience that works there's like, yeah, we're going to do this. So we're going to do an impeach peach sticker campaign. We're gonna leave it with the peach distributors, and they're gonna be distributed throughout the country. So here are some more that I created for Der Spiegel. This is about Kim Jong-un and the threats, the nuclear threats that they throw at each other. This is who's got the bigger button? And then this one. This one I did. I posted it online, and my mom immediately called me. And she said, how could you do that to the President of the United States? He's naked. You can't do that. And I said, okay, Mom, I'll put some clothes on him. So I have a back and forth with my mother that's very creative. I posted this on Father's Day. It's called Daddy Issues. And then I feel with my work that I get to a certain point, I want to push it more, and I want to push it more. And I felt that I created a brand with this symbology and these shapes. And I wanted to see how far can I take this and still have everyone recognize what I was talking about. So I did this kind of thing. Basically, it's all about the mouth now. I can put the mouth on anything. This is for Halloween. Send that picture to my mother. And this is the latest one that I did based on Magritte. Then these are some other covers that I was hired to do, both covers for Time and Der Spiegel the week after Charlottesville. So I did this one for Time and this one for Der Spiegel. And Der Spiegel always goes a little further, and they're like, no, he's not kind of like a racist. He is a racist. So that's... so they always publish something that's a little bit further than I thought they would publish, but they did it. And these are some street posters I've done of the same image. All this led to a campaign for SVA on political posters that I created, and it was all about getting active and participating in politics in the United States, that this is the right time to do so. It was all throughout the subway system in New York City. I wrote and designed all of the 3 posters. Time Magazine has started animating the covers that I've done for them, and this is one of the last ones that I did for them. And then on a 1-year anniversary of Trump's election, Der Spiegel asked me to do a cover. So this gives you an idea of what my process might be like. I ended up sending them, I don't know, about 24 ideas. And at the end, we ended up going with the tidal wave idea. So that's the cover. And then when Michael Wolff's book came out, Fire and Fury, I don't know if you guys have seen it, the cover was very basic design-wise, and I started getting a lot of comments from people saying, why didn't you do this? You should do your own version of it. So I did, and put it on the internet, and now what's happening is people are downloading it, printing it, and sticking it on the actual book cover. I don't know if I'll get sued for this or not. I'm not sure. And this is the latest one for Time Magazine. And also, Der Spiegel always going a little bit further. This was actually a long conversation with the legal department at Der Spiegel. Can we show the President of the United States as a chimpanzee? In the end, they approved it. And Statesman. This is in Brazil.
Donald Trump first appeared on the cover of Time in 1989, and over the years he's had a love-hate relationship with the magazine, famously hanging fake covers complete with fake headlines in 4 of his golf clubs. These days, as president, he regularly makes the cover, but often in a striking, stylized form, which seems to perfectly capture the political moment. The latest issue shows Donald Trump mouth open, his hair a raging inferno, and the headline, Year One. Edel Rodriguez is the man responsible for that and many other covers featuring the president. He's been described as the preeminent illustrator of the Trump era. He joins us now from New York. Edel, thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
So that's a little snippet of CNN and some of the sort of features that I've had. A little story about this poster that I did, and I put it up. I put up this poster in the street in New York City. And I walked about another block to put another poster, and I was immediately surrounded by like hipster-looking guys. And I was like, "Hey guys, how you doing?" And they're like, "Hey man, are you putting up posters?" I'm like, "Sure, yeah." I'm like, "We're the police." It's like, "I thought you were hipsters." They're like, "No, we're undercover cops." "Do you know this is illegal?" I said, "I didn't know." And apparently, I was putting a poster on. This is a private property, even though it looks like a disheveled wall. So we went back and forth for a while, them figuring out what they were going to do with me. and asked me if I'd ever been arrested. I said, I'd never been arrested. So they said, okay, well, we're going to let you go. Just know that you can't do that. And then as they start leaving, one of them starts kind of hemming and hawing and goes, hey, can I have a poster? Really? It's like, yeah, I really like it. Can I have one? And can you sign it for me? And I was like, oh my God. I was like, okay, man, but we're good, right? Well, this means you're not arresting me, right? So I took a poster and I gave it to him. So that's a good example that even though these things are happening in the United States, the police is still not 100%. It's not a police state. These guys they're still asking for signed posters of this, Then I decided to have all of this go into an exhibit. Wyden Kennedy got in touch, the ad agency, about doing a show at their headquarters in Portland, and they wanted to help me take care of everything. So I said, sure. So I created this image for the show. You guys are all going to get a copy of this image printed as you head out yeah. So it's basically an image that puts everything together. Most of the images from the past year that I've created are put into this one image. The show is called Agent Orange because we have a Russian agent for a president, and he's poison like the Agent Orange. So these are some shows from the exhibit. We had about 50 prints up on the wall. A lot of people showed up to the opening. There's been a lot of support for my work in the United States. It's still up right now. One thing they asked me at Wyden Kennedy, is there anything you've thought of doing that you haven't had time to do? I said, yeah, I really want a Trump piñata. I've had this idea for a while. It's an excuse to hit him with a bat, but it's a piñata, so you're not going to get in trouble. So they said, that's fabulous. We can do this. So they hired someone's Peruvian nanny, made the piñata, and then there's like, well, what do you want to do? What do you want to fill it up with? I said, obviously, Cheetos. So we filled the whole thing up with Cheetos, and at the end of the gallery opening, we had a big piñata bashing, and the Cheetos went all over the place. There was Cheeto dust everywhere. These kids started picking up the Cheetos. And it even made it into CNN politics, the big piñata busting. And then finally, one thing that I wanted to do was, now that all of this work was out there, and the Women's March was coming up in just a few weeks ago, I took all of my images and I posted them online on all my feeds, and I offered them to people with no fee. Just download it, make your own posters, print them out, and bring them to the protests, and hoping that people would do this. And I remember people asking me, "Well, how could you just give your work away for free like that?" I said, "Of course you would. It's like you're in a war. Why would you charge soldiers for bullets? So that's the idea: is give people the weapons to fight this government that we have right now." So I put up all these posters online, and the first thing that I got was from this little kid. He took my work and he painted his own poster for his mother, and his mother and him brought it to a women's march in Oakland, California. I got that on Saturday morning in the middle of the marches. Then soon after, I got another poster from a woman in Denver that did a poster based on my artwork. Soon after, these two young ladies from Los Angeles sent me this photograph of images that they had downloaded from the internet and created for a women's march in Los Angeles. And then this one, instead of Man of the Year, they took my image and made it Shithole of the Year. And this is sent from San Francisco. And this one from New York City. And this one from Trump International in New York. And this one, I'd rather live near people from shitholes than people in sheetholes. And Time's Up. And this one from Seattle. Enemy of the People. Thank you.